Hey everybody, Antoni here, and capping off this 4th of July weekend of Fiery Divas, and also my opera reviews here in Zurich, is my review of Bizet's Carmen, which was shown at the Zurich Opera House. The conductor was Vasily Petrenko, the scenography was done by Claudia Birsch, the production was by Matthias Hartmann, the set design was by Volker Hintermeyer, the costumes were by Sue Bühler. The lights were handled by Martin Gebhardt. The chorus master was Ernst Raffelsberger. The choreography was done by Teresa Rothenberg. And the dramaturgy was by Michael Küster. Now, I've already explained why Bizet's Carmen is my absolute favorite operas of all time. And you can check that out in my review of Bizet's Carmen, which was shown at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, but that was a different production. So if you really want to see why I really love that opera so much, go check out that review. Now, let's cut to the chase. What did I think about this particular production of Carmen? Well, I did not really care for this production. First of all, the first two acts, well, mainly the first act did not do any favors for me because it was just it was kind of lifeless for me. I mean, the fact that there was like four different paraphernalia that started each act, act one with a dog, act two with a couple of boxes, act three with a rock, and act four with a bull's skull, as in signifying where these took place, like act one in the square, and then act two in the tavern, smugglers area, act three in a huge mountain, and then act four in the arena. Well, the only shining light in this particular production was how Act 3 looked. And at least with that act, I was able to be kind of convinced that this was set on the mountains. Other than that, I didn't really care about the production overall, though I did like the lighting. At least the lighting was able to be used to its advantage, and it was actually pretty all throughout. However, I can't really say about the rest of the production. Well, mainly the set design and also how the plots were handled. I mean, in the first act, the scene between the soldiers and Michaela was supposed to be charming, sweet, though a little bit feisty. But here, oh my goodness. The fact that these soldiers stripped Michaela was not even funny nor charming. It was just made for shock value, and I was scratching my head thinking, what the hell were these people thinking? And, well, it was quite questionable, and the fact that they also killed Suniga was quite dark. But that's not really a bad thing. I have to say, it was able to keep up the thrill of this opera. And with the chanson bohème, I would have loved to see a little bit more dancing, especially in the beginning. So those were my only gripes with the production. The costumes were at least decent, and even though the costumes were not really representing like 19th century Spain, it was like representing more like the present day, as in with the soldiers you see them in policeman uniform, and then Carmen has like a floral dress in the fourth act, and she comes in this very sexy looking mini skirt and sleeveless blouse. The costumes, all in all, were very decent, even though it was mostly deviated from the source material and was placed in a more modern setting. So overall, the production was, well, kind of disappointing, save for the costumes, which were the only decent factors, and also that of the well-handled lighting. Now, even though I did not care about this production at all, that doesn't mean that there was no great singing. And believe me when I say there has been fantastic singing all around, which is why I came here to watch Carmen, to see such magnificent singing. And in the title role of Bizet's tragic heroine, we have Kate Aldrich. Now, Kate Aldrich has been performing this role for such a long time. I would say for about, let's say, an estimate of 13 or 12 years or so. And this role has become her calling card. And she's basically been singing this in various theaters around the world, whether they be in America, Europe, Asia, what have you. She's been very well known in this role and many other lyric mezzo roles and a few dramatic mezzo roles later in her career, like Adriano from Rienzi. And hearing her as Carmen in this production was an absolute treat for me. I can see why fans and critics alike really, really appreciated Miss Aldrich as Carmen. She not only had the look, I mean, being very young, even though she's currently in her 40s, not to mention she was a very great amneris in Bussetto, but she also had a flair for drama. She was able to use her very fine physique, and it just really shows how dedicated she is at her craft and how much of a great Carmen she is. And she was able to find a lot of nuances that make Carmen such a believable character, especially in her scene with Don Jose, well, the final scene in which it was just so visceral. It was one of the most visceral things I've ever seen in my life, and it was just so thrilling to see Miss Aldrich in the title role of Carmen, which she has been so well known for. And like I said, her voice was very well tuned. It was a very smoky and very sensual instrument. Of course, she had a little bit of a weak start in her habanera, but she was able to catch up very well, all thanks to her solid, smoky, sexy, very, very thrilling voice. And I have to say, this is absolutely her greatest performance of Carmen that I've seen so far. Granted, I've only seen some reviews of her Carmen throughout the past, but this is my first time seeing her live, and my God, was she able to blow me away with her magnificent performance. Her partner, Brandon Jovanovich, sang the role of Don Jose. Now, Brandon Jovanovich was a tenor I saw ever since I was 11 years old, and I was with my grandma, and I saw him as Pinkerton from Madama Butterfly. He was very great in that role, and I haven't really heard his voice until like a few years after, and I heard him as a teenager on YouTube, and he sang Sigmund's Winterstimme wich dem Wonenmond, and I thought it was a very great interpretation of the aria, and hearing him as Don Jose, oh my God, he was just so thrilling. His voice was able to, well, it was a very huge voice. I was able to hear his voice all throughout the theater. It filled the theater so effectively, and his flair for drama was just so magnificent. It was one of the most visceral portrayals of Don Jose that I've ever seen on stage. It is so up there with the likes of Placido Domingo, Jose Carreras, and many, many other great Don Joses of the past. Not to mention, as of recent years, he's starting to sing a lot more dramatic tenor roles like that of Sigmund, Lohengrin, and probably even Florissant. But all I know is that he's starting to sing heavier roles like Sigmund and Lohengrin. And my God, He was a great singer and an equally great actor with his very powerful, dramatic tenor voice. He was able to make Don Jose not only a very believable character, but he was able to be so powerful in his interpretation. And he had the biggest round of applause that it was just so thrilling watching him. So both Aldrich and Jovanovic were able to have such great chemistry together. Now Rachel Hanisch, who was the Michaela in this production, was just so lovely. Now Rachel Hanisch is a soprano who has specialized in such a versatile repertoire, from the dramatic coloratura roles of Constanze and Anne Trulove, to the light lyric roles of Sophie from Rosenkavalier and Pamina from Zauberflöte, to the more full lyric soprano roles of Fiordaligi and the Countess from Marriage of Figaro. Hearing her as Michaela was such a pleasure. Her voice had such a heavenly quality to it, and also a very full lyrical quality as well. It was such an angelic instrument, and she was able to play Michaela's very sweet nature all throughout, and her Je dis que rien m'épouvante was just so touching. It really, really touched my heart just hearing such a very sensitive interpretation of such a very beautiful aria. So kudos to Miss Anish for a very beautiful portrayal of Michaela. Alexander Vinogradov, who was the Escamillo, did a pretty good job in this role. Now, say what you will about Vinogradov. Of course, it's quite agreeable that he doesn't really have the vocal heft of the likes of Walter Berry, Juha Usitalo, Bryn Terfel, George London, and many other great bass baritones of the past. And sure, his voice does come out as a bit smaller than those, but it's safe to say that he was able to fill the theater so well with his voice, and his interpretation of Escamillo wasn't too swaggering. It wasn't too macho, but it was a very fine gentleman. He basically played Escamillo as a very fine and cultured gentleman instead of the usual swaggering Mr. Tough Guy interpretations that we'd usually see, and one that I usually root for more often. But seeing Vinogradov with his very fine voice and very gentlemanly appearance as Escamillo was a welcome treat for me. He did a very good job in this role, even though I could use a little bit more heft, but that's just nitpicking. He did a pretty good job all throughout. And the minor roles were also sung very well. Frasquita and Mercedes, who were sung by Sen Guo and Irena Friedli, both did magnificently, even though I do prefer a more lyrical soprano voice as Mercedes. I have to say, Irena Friedli was able to portray Mercedes as a very cheeky and very sassy friend of Carmen. Sen Guo was able to play Frasquita's very sweet and very spunky nature as well. And it's all thanks to her very sweet, very Nightingale-like voice. So those two definitely had great chemistry. In the roles of Dancair and Remendado, we have Alex Lawrence and Roberto Ortiz. Now, even though I do like a character tenor singing Dancair, I definitely have to say Alex Lawrence was able to use his baritone voice very well, and he was able to be such a great contrast to that of Roberto Ortiz's high tenor remendado. It's a more virile instrument, and Roberto Ortiz Even though I don't really care for his voice in particular, he managed to give Remendado a very great personality all throughout. Suniga was sung by Anatoly Zivko, a very young basso, and he had a very good voice all throughout. And even though his role was minute and quite thankless, I might add, he was able to hold his own pretty well. Morales was sung by Yuri Tsiple, and like I said, even though his role was very minute, he did a pretty good job. So overall, even though there were some singers that had a little bit of a shortcoming here and there, I have to say, the singing was repeat, very solid all throughout, with such great chemistry coming from Aldrich and Jovanovic as the tragic lovers Carmen and Don Jose. Now, the conducting, what more can I say about the conducting? All thanks to Maestro Vasily Petrenko. It was just so full of fire and passion, just like what every great Carmen or every great production of Carmen should be. So, overall, even though I did not care about the production, the singing and the conducting and also the chorus were all fantastic. And this was certainly a way to cap off my opera reviews here in Zurich. And I have to say, I'll definitely miss Zurich. Of course, it's costly to even live here and to even, well, come here on holiday. But I have to say, it's a very beautiful city. And I especially went to the Altstadt. Believe me, when you go to the Altstadt, you will never want to go out of there again. So, yeah, Zurich definitely is a beautiful city, and if you haven't been there before, I highly recommend that you visit this beautiful city, and you will definitely not be disappointed. Until then, this is Antoni signing off, wishing you all a good night, and I'll see you tomorrow in London.